Commander Zexthal stood before the massive observation deck of the research vessel Analytical Pursuit, his four eyes focused on the blue-green world spinning slowly beneath them. Earth, the third planet from a yellow star, home to a species that had recently joined the galactic community after developing faster-than-light travel. The humans, as they called themselves, had been under observation for several cycles now, but the High Council demanded more detailed intelligence before granting them full membership status. As a Veltar, Zexthal was naturally suited for this assignment. His people were known throughout the galaxy for their analytical minds and objective observations. Standing nearly 8 feet tall, with gray-blue skin and multiple sensory organs, the Veltar had served as neutral observers in countless conflicts and diplomatic situations. Their reports were trusted by all major civilizations. Sir, his aide, Subcommander Rilka, approached with a datapad clutched in her 3-fingered hands. The Council's orders have arrived. Zexthal accepted the device, his primary eyes scanning the holographic text, while his secondary eyes continued monitoring the human world below. As he read, his facial tendrils twitched with surprise. "They want us to observe humans in active combat," he said, more to himself than to his aide. "Not just their military exercises or training programs." "Yes, sir. The Council believes that a species' true nature is revealed only under the stress of actual warfare. They want to understand how humans fight, how they treat prisoners, how they behave when their survival is threatened." Zexthal folded his long arms behind his back, a gesture of deep thought among his kind. The Veltar had studied dozens of species before they joined the galactic community. Most followed predictable patterns during conflict. The aggressive species fought with brutal efficiency, but often turned on their own when resources became scarce. The peaceful species either avoided conflict entirely or fought with such reluctance that they were easily defeated. The intelligent species relied heavily on technology and strategic planning, while the physically powerful species used brute force. But humans seemed to be different. They were neither the strongest nor the smartest species the galaxy had encountered, yet they had achieved space travel in remarkably little time. Their planet showed evidence of countless wars throughout their history, yet they had also produced incredible art, literature, and scientific discoveries. They were a puzzle that the Veltar analytical mind found both frustrating and fascinating. "Have our sensors detected any active conflicts on the surface?" Zexthal asked. Rilka manipulated her datapad with practiced efficiency. "Several minor disputes, sir, but nothing that would qualify as a significant military engagement. However, our long-range communications have intercepted reports of a pirate fleet operating in the outer system. 3 vessels, heavily armed, attacking human cargo ships." "Pirates," Zexthal mused. "Not exactly a formal military conflict, but it would certainly put humans under combat stress. How are their authorities responding?" "A human military vessel called the UES Defiance has been dispatched to deal with the situation. It's a destroyer-class ship, according to their classifications. They should reach the area of pirate activity within the next few hours." Zexthal made his decision quickly. "Set course for the outer system. We'll observe this engagement from a safe distance. Make sure our cloaking systems are functioning perfectly. The humans must not know we're watching." The Analytical Pursuit was one of the most advanced observation vessels in the galaxy. Its cloaking technology rendered it invisible to most detection systems, while its sensor arrays could record everything from energy signatures to individual biometric readings from vast distances. As they approached the outer system, Zexthal reviewed what he knew about human military capabilities. Human technology was impressive for such a young species, but it wasn't revolutionary. Their weapons were efficient, but not particularly powerful compared to what other races had developed. Their ships were well designed, but used conventional propulsion and shielding systems. What made humans interesting wasn't their technology, but rather their unpredictable nature. "Sir, we're detecting the human vessel approaching the asteroid field where the pirates have been operating," Rilka reported. "The pirate ships are lying in wait behind the largest asteroid. Zexthal moved to the primary observation station, where multiple screens displayed different views of the unfolding situation. The human destroyer looked small compared to some of the massive dreadnoughts used by older civilizations, but it moved with purpose and precision. Its hull bore the scars of previous battles, and Zexthal noted several weapon ports that seemed to have been recently upgraded. "The pirates are moving to attack positions," his sensor operator announced. 3 ships, as reported, 2 light cruisers, and 1 heavy frigate. They outgunned the human vessel significantly. This would be an interesting test. How would humans respond when facing superior firepower? Would they retreat and call for reinforcements? Would they attempt to negotiate? Or would they find some clever tactical solution? The answer came quickly. Instead of slowing down or trying to hide, the human destroyer accelerated directly toward the asteroid field. It wasn't running away or trying to find cover. It was charging straight into what was obviously a trap. "Fascinating," Zexthal muttered. "Either they're incredibly brave or incredibly foolish." The first pirate ship opened fire as soon as the human vessel came within range. Bright energy beams and explosive projectiles filled the space between the asteroids. The human ship's shields flared as they absorbed the incoming fire, but the destroyer didn't slow down or return fire immediately. "They're using the asteroids," Rilka observed, pointing to the tactical display. "Look at their flight pattern." Zexthal studied the human ship's movements more carefully. The destroyer was indeed weaving between the asteroids, but not randomly. Each maneuver seemed calculated to put chunks of rock between themselves and the pirate weapons. More importantly, their course was leading the pirates deeper into the asteroid field, where the larger ships would have difficulty maneuvering. "Clever," he admitted. "They're turning the environment to their advantage." The pirates had apparently realized the same thing. The 2 light cruisers split off, trying to flank the human ship and force it out of the asteroid cover. This left the heavy frigate to pursue the destroyer alone through the maze of floating rocks. What happened next surprised even Zexthal's analytical mind. The human destroyer suddenly reversed course, spinning around with a maneuver that should have been impossible for a ship of its size. Instead of continuing to run from the heavy frigate, it charged directly at the larger vessel, all weapons firing at once. "They're attacking the largest enemy ship while separated from its support," the sensor operator said, confusion evident in his voice. "That goes against all basic tactical doctrine." Zexthal watched in fascination as the human ship closed the distance with the pirate frigate. The larger ship had superior firepower and stronger shields, but it was caught completely off guard by the sudden aggressive maneuver. The destroyer's weapons focused on a single section of the frigate's hull, concentrating fire until the shields in that area collapsed entirely. What followed was even more surprising. Instead of continuing to attack the weakened section, the human ship suddenly veered away, using the confused frigate as cover while it engaged one of the returning light cruisers. The pirates were now forced to fire around their own heavy frigate, limiting their ability to coordinate their attacks. "They're using the enemy ships against each other," Zexthal realized, forcing them into positions where they can't support one another effectively. The battle continued for another 20 minutes, with the human destroyer performing maneuvers that seemed to violate common sense while somehow achieving tactical advantages. They used asteroid impacts to damage enemy ships, timed their attacks to catch pirates while they were changing course, and even managed to trick one pirate cruiser into firing on its own ally during a particularly chaotic exchange. When the fighting finally ended, all 3 pirate ships were either destroyed or disabled, while the human destroyer had suffered only moderate damage. But what impressed Zexthal most wasn't the tactical brilliance of the engagement. It was what happened after the shooting stopped. The human ship moved to the largest piece of wreckage, where life signs indicated survivors. Instead of leaving the pirates to die in the vacuum of space, the humans extended their shields around the damaged ship and began rescue operations. "They're saving their enemies?" Rilka asked, disbelief coloring her voice. "It appears so," Zexthal replied, studying the sensor readings carefully. They're bringing pirate survivors aboard their own ship. This behavior was almost unheard of in the galaxy. Most species either executed captured enemies or left them to die. Even the more civilized races usually just took prisoners for interrogation and eventual exchange. But the humans were actively risking their own safety to save the lives of people who had just been trying to kill them. "Sir, we're intercepting their communications," the communications officer reported. The human captain is speaking with his medical officer about treating wounded pirates. Zexthal listened to the translated conversation, his analytical mind struggling to understand the reasoning behind the human actions. The captain was ordering his medical staff to treat the pirate wounded with the same care they would show their own crew members. He was also arranging for the pirates to be transferred to civilian authorities rather than simply executed, as would be common among many galactic civilizations. "Status of a human crew?" he asked his sensor operator. 14 minor injuries, 3 moderate injuries from battle damage, but no fatalities among the humans. They fought efficiently and decisively, but they also took measures to protect their own people throughout the engagement. Zexthal made notes in his observation log, but he found himself struggling to categorize what he had witnessed. The humans had displayed tactical creativity that impressed him, fighting with a combination of aggression and intelligence that had allowed them to defeat superior numbers and firepower. But they had also shown a concern for enemy lives that seemed to contradict their effectiveness as warriors. "Set course back to Earth orbit," he ordered. "I need to review these recordings and compile my initial report." As the analytical pursuit moved away from the asteroid field, Zexthal retreated to his private study to analyze what he had observed. The humans had fought like warriors, but they had also acted like, he struggled to find the right term, guardians? Protectors? Most species viewed warfare as a necessity to be endured, a competition for resources or territory where only the strong survived. But the humans seemed to view it differently. They fought not just to win, but to protect something. Even their treatment of defeated enemies suggested they saw themselves as protectors of some larger principle rather than simply conquerors. This observation would require much more investigation. The High Council wanted to understand how humans would behave in combat, but Zexthal realized that this single engagement had raised more questions than it had answered. How could a species be both ruthlessly effective warriors and compassionate protectors at the same time? It seemed like a contradiction that defied analysis. He opened a communication channel to the High Council, knowing that his initial report would likely be met with skepticism. The other council members would want more data, more observations, more concrete evidence before drawing any conclusions about human nature. Council Archive. This is Commander Zexthal aboard the Analytical Pursuit. He began recording. Initial observation of human combat behavior has been completed. Results are inconclusive and require further investigation. Humans demonstrate tactical innovation and combat effectiveness beyond their technological capabilities. However, they also display behavioral patterns inconsistent with typical warrior species psychology. Request permission to continue extended observation period. As he sealed the communication for transmission, Zexthal looked out at the blue-green planet turning slowly below his ship. Somewhere down there, billions of humans live their lives, probably unaware that they were being studied by alien observers. What other surprises would they reveal? What other contradictions would challenge his understanding of intelligent species behavior? The commander settled back into his study chair, already planning the next phase of his observations. The High Council wanted to understand humans, but Zexthal was beginning to suspect that understanding the species would require him to reconsider everything he thought he knew about the nature of intelligence, warfare, and civilization itself. The first day of observation had ended, but Zexthal's education about humanity was just beginning. 3 weeks had passed since the pirate engagement, and Commander Zexthal found himself more puzzled by human behavior than when he had started his observations. The High Council had granted his request for extended surveillance, but their patience was wearing thin. They wanted concrete answers about human military capabilities and psychological profiles, not philosophical questions about the nature of warfare. "Sir, we're receiving a priority transmission from a human defense command," Subcommander Rilka announced as she entered his study. "It appears to be a general mobilization order." Zexthal set aside his analysis reports and followed his aide to the command center. The intercepted human communications were displayed across multiple screens, and what he saw made his sensory tendrils twitch with concern. A distress call from a Kepler 442 system, the communications officer explained. "A civilian colony is under attack by an unknown alien force. The humans are dispatching a full battle group to respond." Zexthal studied the tactical displays showing human ship movements across their local space. Unlike the random pirate attack they had previously observed, this was organized military action against human civilians. The attacking force was identified as Skeltari Raiders, a nomadic warrior species that survive by conquering and enslaving weaker civilizations. "The Skeltari," Zexthal muttered. "They're not just pirates. They're systematic conquerors. This will be a very different kind of engagement." The Skeltari were well known throughout the galaxy. They possessed advanced military technology and followed a strict warrior culture that valued strength above all else. They showed no mercy to defeated enemies and considered compassion a weakness to be exploited. If the humans tried to apply the same tactics they had used against the pirates, they would likely be slaughtered. "Set course for the Kepler 442 system," Zexthal ordered. "Maximum stealth protocols. We need to observe this engagement from the beginning." The journey to the colony system took 2 days, during which Zexthal studied everything available about both the human colony and the Skeltari raiding tactics. New Harmony was a small agricultural world, home to approximately 50,000 human civilians. It had minimal defensive installations and relied on its remote location for protection. The Skeltari had somehow discovered its location and were now systematically destroying its infrastructure while capturing civilians for the slave markets. When the analytical pursuit arrived in the system, the situation was already dire. 3 Skeltari warships orbited the planet, their weapons systematically destroying anything that might offer resistance. Fires could be seen from orbit as cities and industrial facilities burned. The raiders had also deployed ground forces to major population centers. "The human battle group is still 6 hours out," Rilka reported. "At this rate, the colony will be completely conquered before they arrive." Zexthal was about to agree when his sensor operator suddenly straightened in his chair. "Sir, I'm detecting a small human vessel approaching the planet. It's not part of the battle group." "Show me," Zexthal ordered. The tactical display highlighted a single human ship, barely larger than a heavy fighter, moving toward the planet on what appeared to be a suicide course. The vessel's identification marked it as a civilian freight hauler called the Lucky Strike, definitely not a military ship. "What is a civilian vessel doing here?" Rilka asked. Their answer came as the Lucky Strike opened a communication channel to the Skeltari fleet. The transmission was broadcast on all frequencies, making it impossible for the Veltar observers to miss. "This is Captain Sarah Chun of the merchant vessel Lucky Strike," a human female voice announced. "I'm carrying medical supplies and food for the New Harmony colony. I request safe passage to deliver these supplies to civilian populations." Zexthal's 4 eyes widened in surprise. A single, unarmed civilian ship was attempting to negotiate with 3 Skeltari warships. It was either an act of incredible bravery or unbelievable stupidity. The Skeltari response was predictable. "Human vessel, you will surrender your ship and prepare to be boarded. Resistance will result in immediate destruction." "I'm not carrying anything of military value," Captain Chun replied calmly. "Just medicine and food. Surely your warriors don't need to steal from sick and hungry civilians." Zexthal found himself leaning forward, fascinated by the human's approach. She wasn't begging or showing fear. Instead, she seemed to be challenging the Skeltari sense of honor, implying that attacking civilians was beneath them. "You dare question Skeltari honor?" the raider commander snarled. Prepare to die, foolish human. Two of the warships turned toward the tiny freight hauler, weapons charging. The Lucky Strike couldn't possibly survive even a single hit from their guns. Zexthal expected to witness the pointless destruction of a brave but foolish civilian. Instead, something extraordinary happened. The Lucky Strike didn't try to run or hide. Captain Shun accelerated directly toward the nearest Skeltari warship, broadcasting another message as she approached. New Harmony Colony. This is the Lucky Strike. I'm coming in hot with your supplies. Medical teams prepare to receive casualties in grid sectors 7, 12, and 15. Food distribution teams report to landing zones Alpha and Beta. It took Zexthal a moment to realize what she was doing. The human captain wasn't just delivering supplies. She was broadcasting detailed information about colony conditions and resistance activities in a way that sounded like routine supply coordination. But the Skeltari would interpret it as intelligence about human defensive positions and population centers. She's feeding them false information, he breathed, making them think she's revealing strategic intelligence when she's actually misdirecting their ground forces. The Skeltari commander apparently reached the same conclusion. Instead of destroying the small ship immediately, he ordered it to be captured alive. Bring me the human captain. She will tell us everything she knows about their defenses. The Lucky Strike allowed herself to be tractored aboard the nearest warship, still broadcasting supply coordination, messages that were actually directing human civilians away from areas where Skeltari forces were concentrating. It was a deception so subtle that it had fooled warriors who had been fighting for centuries. Track that ship, Zexthal ordered. I want to see what happens next. The Veltar sensors could penetrate Skeltari hull armor enough to monitor life signs and energy patterns. They watched as Captain Shun was brought to what appeared to be an interrogation chamber. The Skeltari commander was personally overseeing her questioning, clearly believing he had captured valuable intelligence. What followed was perhaps the most remarkable display of psychological warfare Zexthal had ever witnessed. Captain Shin didn't break under interrogation. She didn't reveal human secrets or beg for mercy. Instead, she began telling stories about the human colonists, describing their lives and families in vivid detail. She spoke about children who had been born on New Harmony, elderly couples who had spent their entire savings to start new lives there, young farmers who were just beginning to make the barren soil productive. What is she doing? Rilka asked. Why is she telling them about civilian lives? Zexthal was beginning to understand. She's not giving them tactical intelligence. She's making the colonists real to their captors, making it harder for the Skeltari to see them as just resources to be harvested. The interrogation continued for hours. The Skeltari commander grew increasingly frustrated as Captain Shun refused to provide useful military information. But something strange was happening to the raider crew. Zexthal's sensors detected subtle changes in their biorhythms, signs of emotional stress that were unusual for Skeltari warriors. The human is affecting them, Zexthal realized. Her stories about the colonists are creating psychological pressure even on hardened warriors. The breakthrough came when Captain Shun began describing a group of human children who had organized themselves to help elderly colonists evacuate their homes. She spoke with such conviction about their courage and selflessness that even the Skeltari guards seemed moved. These children risk their lives to save strangers, she said. They don't have weapons or training, but they refuse to abandon anyone who needs help. That's what humans do. We protect each other, even when it costs us everything. The Skeltari commander struck her across the face, drawing blood. Silence. Your species is weak. You waste resources on the helpless. Captain Shun wiped the blood from her mouth and smiled. You're wrong. Our willingness to sacrifice for others is what makes us strong. It's why we'll never stop fighting to protect what we love. At that moment, the human battle group arrived in the system. Zexthal watched in amazement as 18 human warships dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation. They didn't attack immediately or demand surrender. Instead, their commander opened communications with the Skeltari fleet. This is Admiral Marcus Webb of the Terran Defense Force. You are attacking civilians under the protection of the Human Federation. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences. The Skeltari commander's response was swift and predictable. Come and take them if you can, humans. We do not fear your tiny fleet. What happened next challenged every assumption Zexthal had made about human military doctrine. The human fleet split into 3 groups, but instead of engaging the Skeltari warships directly, they focused their initial attack on the Raider ground forces. Precision strikes from orbit eliminated Skeltari landing craft and troop concentrations while carefully avoiding civilian areas. It was an incredibly difficult type of warfare that required perfect coordination and extensive firepower control. They're prioritizing civilian protection over tactical advantage, Zexthal observed. That should make them vulnerable to counterattack from the warships. But the humans had planned for this. As the Skeltari fleet moved to engage what they thought was a divided enemy force, the human ships revealed their true strategy. Each group had specialized roles that complemented the others perfectly. One group provided electronic warfare and sensor jamming. Another focused on long-range missile strikes, and the third closed for direct engagement with advanced energy weapons. The coordination was flawless. The Skeltari found themselves fighting 3 different types of engagement simultaneously, while their own sensors and communications were being systematically disrupted. It was like fighting an opponent who could think and react faster than should have been possible. But what impressed Zexthal most was the human response to casualties. When one of their destroyers took critical damage and began losing life support, the other ships immediately moved to assist, even though it put them at tactical disadvantage. They prioritized saving their crew members over pressing their attack advantage. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "the humans are attempting to rescue their captured captain from the Skeltari flagship." Zexthal watched as a small group of human fighters performed an incredibly risky maneuver, docking with the enemy warship while the battle raged around them. It was military madness, risking multiple ships and crews to save a single person, but somehow they made it work. Captain Shun and her rescue team fought their way back to their ships, but not before she transmitted one final message to the Skeltari commander. "Your warriors fought bravely, but they fought for conquest. We fight for each other. That's the difference between us." The battle ended with the Skeltari fleet in full retreat. 2 of their warships were destroyed, and the third was too damaged to continue fighting. The human fleet suffered significant casualties, but they had achieved their objective. The colony was safe. In the aftermath, Zexthal observed something that solidified his growing understanding of human nature. Instead of pursuing the retreating Skeltari to finish them off, the human fleet immediately focused on rescue and relief operations. They deployed medical teams to the planet's surface, began rebuilding critical infrastructure, and even treated wounded Skeltari prisoners with the same care they showed their own people. "This makes no tactical sense," Rilka commented. "They could have eliminated a future threat, but they chose to focus on healing instead." "No, Sexually replied slowly. "It makes perfect sense once you understand what they're really fighting for. They're not fighting to conquer or dominate. They're fighting to protect their way of life. And their way of life includes showing mercy to defeated enemies." As he compiled his second report for the High Council, Zexthal found himself struggling to find adequate words to describe what he had witnessed. The humans weren't just warriors or just peacekeepers. They were something the galaxy had never seen before. Protectors who fought not for themselves, but for principles that transcended individual survival. The implications were staggering. If humans could maintain this balance between fierce effectiveness and compassionate principles, they could become either the galaxy's greatest allies or its most formidable opponents. The choice would depend entirely on how other civilizations chose to interact with them. His education about humanity was far from complete, but already Zexthal was beginning to suspect that the High Council's standard evaluation criteria might be inadequate for understanding this remarkable species. The message from the High Council arrived with maximum priority encryption, causing every alert system on the analytical pursuit to activate simultaneously. Commander Zexthal reviewed the orders twice before fully comprehending their implications. "They want us to observe what?" Subcommander Rilka asked, reading over his shoulder. "A human peacekeeping mission to Thraxis Prime," Zexthal replied, his voice heavy with concern. "The Council seems to think this will provide definitive evidence of how humans handle complex military situations." Rilka's sensory tendrils darkened with worry. "Sir, Thraxis Prime isn't just any peacekeeping mission. It's been classified as a Grade 5 humanitarian crisis. 3 separate species fighting a 3-way civil war, with civilians caught in the crossfire." Zexthal nodded grimly. The Thraxis system had once been a model of interspecies cooperation, with 3 allied races sharing resources and technology on a garden world that could support all their populations. But a dispute over mining rights had escalated into ethnic violence, then full-scale war. Millions of civilians from all 3 species were trapped in combat zones, facing starvation and genocide. "The Galactic Council has tried to mediate for 2 years, Zexthal said, reviewing the classified briefings. "The Zephyrians won't negotiate with the Corval. The Corval won't recognize the Altarian territorial claims, and the Altarians consider the others to be invaders who should be eliminated entirely. And the humans volunteered to establish a peacekeeping presence." Rilka sounded incredulos. Even the combined fleets of 3 major galactic powers couldn't stop the fighting. According to their official request to the Council, the humans believe they can facilitate meaningful dialogue between the combatants while protecting civilian populations. They've been granted permission to try, with the understanding that failure could result in the total destruction of Thraxis Prime. The analytical pursuit arrived in the Thraxis system to find exactly what Zexthal had expected: chaos. Orbital stations burned in the vacuum of space while debris fields marked the locations of ships destroyed in the endless fighting. The planet itself showed the scars of orbital bombardment, with entire cities reduced to rubble and refugee camps sprawling across what had once been fertile farmland. "Human fleet approaching," his sensor operator announced. "Single ship, medium cruiser class. Designation, UES Peacekeeper." Zexthal studied the approaching vessel with growing amazement. A single ship to stop a 3-way war that had consumed an entire star system? It was either a display of incredible arrogance or unshakable faith in their abilities. "They're broadcasting on all frequencies," the communications officer reported. "Message directed to all combatant forces." The transmission appeared on the main screen, showing a human woman in military uniform. Her rank insignia identified her as Captain Elena Rodriguez, but what struck Zexthal was her expression. She looked neither threatening nor pleading, but rather like someone delivering important news to friends. "This is Captain Rodriguez of the United Earthship Peacekeeper. I'm speaking to all forces currently engaged in combat operations in the Thraxis system. We know you're fighting for things that matter to your people. We know you've suffered losses that can't be forgotten. We're not here to tell you that your grievances aren't valid or that you should simply stop fighting." Zexthal leaned forward, intrigued by this opening. Most peacekeeping efforts began with demands for immediate ceasefire and threats of intervention. Captain Rodriguez was taking a completely different approach. "We're here because there are millions of civilians caught in the middle of your conflict," she continued. "Children who don't understand why their homes are being destroyed. Elderly people who remember when Thraxis was a place where different species lived in harmony. Families separated by battle lines who just want to be reunited." The human captain paused, allowing her words to sink in before continuing. "I'm not asking you to forgive your enemies or forget your dead. I'm asking you to help us create safe zones where civilians can receive food, medical care, and protection while you continue to work out your differences." What happened next surprised everyone monitoring the transmission. Instead of rejecting the human proposal outright, representatives from all 3 combatant factions responded with requests for clarification. They wanted to know what the humans meant by safe zones and how such areas would be established and maintained. Fascinating, Zexthul murmured. She's not positioning herself as a mediator between enemies. She's presenting herself as an advocate for the civilians that all sides claim to be protecting. The human response was immediate and detailed. Captain Rodriguez outlined a plan that was both militarily sophisticated and diplomatically brilliant. The humans would establish protected zones around refugee camps and civilian population centers, but these zones would be jointly patrolled by volunteers from all three combatant forces working under human coordination. Each patrol will include representatives from all three of your peoples, she explained. You'll be working together to protect civilians from all three species. This isn't about forcing you to trust each other completely. It's about giving you a chance to see that you all want the same thing: safety for innocent people. The proposal was met with skepticism and demands for guarantees. How could the humans ensure that one faction wouldn't use the safe zones to gain tactical advantage? How could they prevent the volunteer patrols from turning into new battlegrounds? Captain Rodriguez's answer demonstrated a level of strategic thinking that impressed even Zexthul's analytical mind. Every patrol will include human observers who are authorized to call for immediate intervention if a ceasefire is violated. Every safe zone will be monitored by our ship's sensors, with live feeds available to all faction leadership. Most importantly, every civilian who enters a safe zone will be interviewed to document their experiences and ensure they're receiving proper care. She's creating a system of mutual accountability, Zexthul realized. Each faction becomes responsible for protecting civilians from the other groups, making it harder for anyone to justify attacks on civilian targets. The human ship moved into orbit around their Axis Prime and immediately began establishing the promised safe zones. What Zexthul observed over the following days challenged every assumption he had made about peacekeeping operations. The humans didn't impose their will through superior firepower or technology. Instead, they created incentives for cooperation that appealed to each faction's existing motivations. The Zephyrians, who prided themselves on their technological advancement, were given responsibility for setting up communication networks in the safe zones. The Corval, whose culture emphasized honor and duty, were tasked with organizing refugee evacuations. The Altarians, who had superior medical knowledge, were put in charge of healthcare operations. They're not trying to change the fundamental nature of the conflict, Rilka observed. They're channeling each group's strengths toward protecting civilians instead of fighting enemies. Zexthul watched as human personnel worked alongside volunteers from all three factions to establish the first safe zone around a refugee camp, housing nearly 100,000 civilians. The humans were clearly in command, but they made a point of consulting with local volunteers on every decision and incorporating suggestions from all three species. The real test came when a Corval military unit attempted to use one of the safe zones as a staging area for an attack on Zephyrian positions. The human response was swift and decisive. Captain Rodriguez personally led a team to confront the Corval commander, but instead of threatening military action, she did something that left Zexthul speechless. She brought with her a group of Corval civilians, including children who had been receiving aid in the safe zone. Commander Thakvar, she addressed the Corval officer, I want you to meet some of the people you've been protecting. These children and their families are alive today because your people volunteered to help establish this safe zone. She gestured to the civilians, who approached the military commander with a mixture of respect and hope. They wanted to thank you personally for keeping them safe. They also wanted to ask you something important. One of the Corval children, barely old enough to speak clearly, looked up at the imposing military commander and asked a simple question. Will you keep us safe from the fighting? Zexthul watched as the hardened warrior's expression changed from defiance to something approaching anguish. The child's innocent trust was more effective than any military threat could have been. We cannot use the safe zones for military operations, Commander Thakvar announced to his troops. Our duty is to protect our people, not to endanger them for tactical advantage. The incident became a turning point in the peacekeeping mission. Word spread throughout all three factions about how the humans had handled the situation, and something remarkable began happening. Military commanders from all sides started visiting the safe zones personally, not to inspect defenses or look for tactical opportunities, but to see the civilians they claim to be protecting. They're creating personal connections between the military leadership and the people affected by the war, Zexthal realized, making it harder for commanders to make decisions that would put civilians at risk. Over the following weeks, the safe zones expanded and multiplied. More importantly, the joint patrols began functioning as genuine cooperative units. Zephyrian engineers worked with Corval security specialists and Altarian medics to address problems that affected all their people. The breakthrough came when a natural disaster struck one of the major population centers. A seismic event caused massive building collapses, trapping thousands of civilians regardless of their species. The human response was immediate. They declared the entire affected area a temporary safe zone and called for assistance from all available forces. What followed was unprecedented in the history of the conflict. Military units from all three factions worked together for 72 hours straight to rescue civilians from the wreckage. They shared equipment, coordinated search patterns, and risked their lives to save people who would have been considered enemies just days earlier. Zexthal documented everything as Corval soldiers carried injured Zephyrians to Altarian medical stations, while Zephyrian engineers used their equipment to reach Corval families trapped in collapsed buildings. The humans coordinated the effort, but made sure that the rescue teams were integrated, forcing former enemies to depend on each other to save lives. "Sir, I'm detecting something unusual," his sensor operator announced. The combatant forces have stopped shooting at each other. The observation was correct. For the first time in 2 years, the Thraxis system was quiet. Not because anyone had surrendered or been defeated, but because all three sides had voluntarily ceased hostile operations to focus on disaster relief. Captain Rodriguez seized the moment to call for a formal meeting between faction representatives. But instead of holding the meeting in a neutral location or aboard her ship, she arranged it in one of the refugee camps, with civilian observers from all three species present. "I want your leaders to see who they're really fighting for," she explained to the faction representatives. "And I want the civilians to hear their leaders explain why continued fighting is more important than permanent peace." The meeting that followed was unlike any diplomatic negotiation Zexthal had ever observed. Instead of formal protocols and carefully prepared statements, it became a conversation between leaders who were suddenly seeing their conflict through the eyes of the people they claimed to represent. The breakthrough came when an elderly Altarian civilian stood up and addressed all three faction leaders directly. "My granddaughter is friends with a Zephyrian boy and a Corval girl. They play together in the safe zone every day. They share their food and help each other with their lessons. They don't understand why their parents used to be enemies. Can you explain to them why they should hate each other when they grow up?" The question hung in the air like a challenge that couldn't be answered with military doctrine or political rhetoric. Zexthal watched as three hardened military commanders struggled to find words that would justify continuing a war in the face of such innocent hope. "We cannot," the Corval representative finally said. "We cannot tell our children to hate people who have helped save our lives." The ceasefire that emerged from that meeting wasn't perfect. There were still disagreements about territorial boundaries and resource allocation. But there was also a fundamental change in how the three species viewed their relationship. They had seen themselves working together toward common goals, and they had discovered that cooperation was more rewarding than conflict. As the analytical pursuit prepared to leave the Thraxis system, Zexthal found himself struggling to categorize what he had witnessed. The humans hadn't won a military victory or imposed a political solution. Instead, they had created conditions that allowed former enemies to rediscover their shared values and common interests. "Sir, How will you report this to the High Council? Rilka asked as they watched the last human peacekeeping teams prepare to depart. I'm not sure I can, Zexthel admitted. How do you explain to a military council that the most effective weapon against war might be compassion? How do you document the tactical value of forcing enemies to see each other as people rather than targets? The implications of what he had observed were staggering. If humans could consistently apply this approach to conflicts throughout the galaxy, they could potentially revolutionize how civilizations interacted with each other. But it also raised troubling questions about what would happen if anyone tried to threaten the humans directly. A species that could convince others to abandon warfare through appeals to shared humanity might be capable of inspiring incredible loyalty among their allies. But they might also be capable of terrible vengeance against anyone who threatened the innocent people they worked so hard to protect. As his ship entered hyperspace for the return journey to human space, Zexthal realized that his understanding of humanity was about to face its greatest test. The High Council had arranged for one final observation that would reveal the true nature of human behavior when their own survival was threatened. The humans were about to face an invasion force that would show no mercy and accept no negotiation. Everything Zexthal had learned about their compassionate nature and diplomatic skills would be put to the ultimate test when they faced an enemy that viewed such qualities as weaknesses to be exploited. The emergency signal reached the analytical pursuit while Commander Zexthal was preparing his final report for the High Council. The transmission was brief, but unmistakable. The Devourers had broken through the outer defensive line and were advancing toward Earth itself. Zexthal felt his sensory tendrils constrict with fear. The Devourers were perhaps the most terrifying force in the known galaxy, a nomadic species that consumed entire worlds to fuel their endless expansion. They showed no mercy, accepted no surrender, and left nothing but dead space in their wake. Civilizations that had stood for millennia had fallen before their relentless advance. Sir, Subcommander Rilka burst into his quarters without ceremony. The High Council has ordered us to maintain our position and observe the human response to the Devourer invasion. They want to know how humans react when faced with extinction. Of course they do, Zexthal replied grimly. The perfect test of everything we've observed. How does a species that values compassion and cooperation respond to an enemy that understands only destruction? The journey back to Earth took 3 days, during which Zexthal monitored human communications and military movements with growing concern. The Devourer fleet was massive, easily 10 times larger than anything humanity had ever faced. Their ships were organic constructs powered by consumed biomatter, capable of literally eating their way through enemy vessels and adding the absorbed material to their own mass. Against such a force, the human qualities that Zexthal had found so remarkable, their mercy toward enemies and protection of civilians, might prove to be fatal weaknesses. When the analytical pursuit arrived in the Sol system, the situation was even worse than the initial reports had indicated. The Devourer Vanguard had already reached the outer planets and was systematically stripping them of resources. Jupiter's moons were being consumed one by one, their mass converted into fuel and new ship components for the growing enemy fleet. Human defensive positions, the sensor operator reported. They've established a battle line near Mars orbit, but they're heavily outnumbered. Zexthal studied the tactical display with professional interest and growing dread. The human fleet was impressive by the standards of their young civilization, but it looked pathetically small compared to the writhing mass of Devourer bioships advancing toward them. Each enemy vessel was the size of a small moon, covered in weapons that could crack planets and defended by armor that could regenerate from battle damage. They're not retreating, Rilka observed with surprise. Even facing impossible odds, they're holding position. Where else would they go? Zexthal replied. This is their home. They have nowhere to run. The human fleet commander opened communications with the approaching Devourers, though Zexthal knew it was a futile gesture. The Devourers had never been known to respond to diplomatic overtures from their prey. "This is Admiral Chun of the Terran Defense Force." The transmission began. "You're approaching human territory. We know what you are and what you do to the worlds you conquer. We're here to tell you that Earth is not available for consumption." The Devourer response came in the form of an energy beam that would have destroyed a normal ship instantly. The human flagship's shields flared and held but barely. A second shot would certainly be fatal. "You will be consumed," the Devourer hive mind replied in its characteristic multi-tone voice that sounded like thousands of beings speaking in unison. "Your resistance will add strength to our fleet. Your world will feed our expansion. This is inevitable." Admiral Chin's response surprised even Zexthal, who had grown accustomed to unexpected human behavior. "Maybe you're right," she said calmly. "Maybe we can't stop you from taking our world, but we can make sure you regret trying." What happened next defied everything Zexthal understood about military tactics and strategic thinking. Instead of engaging the Devourer fleet directly, the human ships suddenly scattered in all directions. Some headed toward the inner planets, others toward the asteroid belt, and a few even began moving toward the outer system where the Devourers had already established their presence. "They're abandoning the defensive line," the sensor operator announced with confusion. "Sir, it looks like they're retreating, but in completely random directions." Zexthal watched the display with growing understanding. "No, they're not retreating. They're positioning themselves for something else entirely. Track their movements more carefully." As the human ships moved throughout the solar system, a pattern began to emerge. They weren't running away from the enemy. They were surrounding them. More importantly, they were placing themselves near civilian installations, refugee ships, and evacuation routes. "They're not trying to defeat the Devourers in direct combat," Zexthal realized. "They're trying to make the cost of victory too high for the enemy to accept." The first indication of the human strategy came when a group of Devourer ships moved to attack the evacuation fleet departing from Mars. 3 human destroyers intercepted them, but instead of engaging in traditional combat, they did something that left Zexthal speechless. The human ships rammed the Devourer vessels at full speed. The impacts were devastating to both sides. The human ships were completely destroyed, but they had damaged the Devourer bioships badly enough to disable them. More importantly, they had bought time for the civilian evacuation to reach safety. "They're sacrificing their ships to protect non-combatants," Rilka whispered. "They're choosing certain death to save others." But the human strategy was more sophisticated than simple sacrifice. As the main Devourer fleet moved toward Earth, they found human ships waiting for them at every strategic position throughout the inner system. Each engagement followed the same pattern. The humans would fight with incredible ferocity until the enemy was about to overwhelm them. Then they would activate some kind of self-destruct mechanism that maximized damage to the attacking force. "Sir, I'm detecting massive energy buildup from the human installations on Earth," the sensor operator reported. "It looks like they're preparing to destroy their own planet." Zexthal felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. "Show me those readings." The data was unmistakable. The humans were building toward some kind of planetary-scale explosion that would render Earth completely uninhabitable. They were preparing to destroy their own homeworld rather than let it be consumed by the Devourers. "This is Admiral Chun to all Devourer forces," came another transmission from the battered human flagship. "We know you're listening, so listen carefully. We've rigged our entire planet with fusion charges. If you try to land forces on Earth, we'll detonate them all. You'll get a dead rock instead of a living world." The Devourer hive mind's response was immediate and filled with rage. "You would destroy your own world rather than submit to consumption? This is madness." "No," Admiral Chun replied with calm certainty. "This is humanity. We don't submit. We don't surrender. And we sure as hell don't let monsters feast on the people we've sworn to protect." What followed was the most vicious space battle Zexthal had ever witnessed. The Devourers denied their expected easy meal, attacked with unprecedented fury. But the humans had turned their entire solar system into a weapon. Every asteroid had been mined and rigged with explosives. Every space station was prepared to self-destruct when overrun. Every ship was ready to ram enemy vessels rather than allow them to consume human resources. The fighting was apocalyptic. Entire moons were shattered by the conflict. Space stations that had taken decades to build were reduced to debris in minutes. The asteroid belt became a maze of wreckage and explosions that made navigation nearly impossible. But something remarkable was happening to the Devourer fleet. For the first time in their history, they were taking unsustainable losses. Every ship they destroyed cost them resources rather than adding to their strength. Every human position they overran exploded rather than providing new biomatter for their growth. They're actually doing it, Rilka said with amazement. They're making the invasion cost more than it's worth. The turning point came when a group of human volunteers, led by Captain Sarachan from the previous observations, somehow managed to infiltrate and sabotage one of the largest Devourer bioships. The explosion that followed took out 3 other enemy vessels and created a gap in their battle line that the remaining human forces immediately exploited. But it was Admiral Chen's final transmission that revealed the true genius of the human strategy. "Hive mind," she broadcast to the Devourer fleet. "You came here expecting to add our strength to yours. Instead, you've lost dozens of your ships and gained nothing. You're weaker now than when you arrived. Is that really the kind of tactical thinking that's allowed you to conquer the galaxy?" The question struck at the heart of Devourer psychology. Their entire civilization was based on the principle of constant growth through consumption. The idea that an encounter could leave them diminished rather than strengthened was almost incomprehensible to their collective mind. "You are few," the hive mind replied, but there was uncertainty in its multi-tone voice. "We are many. We will overwhelm you eventually." "Maybe," Admiral Chen conceded. "But at what cost? How many ships are you willing to lose for a dead world? How much of your strength will you waste fighting an enemy that refuses to be consumed?" The psychological warfare was as effective as the physical battles. The Devourers had built their expansion strategy around the assumption that resistance would crumble when faced with overwhelming force. They had never encountered a species willing to destroy itself rather than submit. "And there's something else you should consider," Admiral Chen continued. "Word of this battle is being broadcast throughout the galaxy. Every species you've conquered is watching. They're seeing that the mighty Devourers can be hurt. They're learning that resistance is possible." Zexthal realized the full implications of what he was witnessing. The humans weren't just fighting for their own survival. They were trying to inspire resistance throughout the galaxy. Their sacrifice would demonstrate that even the Devourers could be defeated, encouraging other civilizations to resist rather than submit. The Devourer hive mind's final response was filled with a rage that bordered on panic. "You will all be consumed. Your defiance means nothing." But their actions spoke louder than their words. Faced with mounting losses and the prospect of a Pyrrhic victory that would weaken rather than strengthen their forces, the Devourer fleet began to withdraw. They had never encountered prey that could transform its own destruction into a weapon against them. As the alien bioships retreated toward the outer system, Zexthal found himself struggling to process what he had observed. The humans had faced extinction and responded not with despair or submission, but with a defiance so absolute that it had forced their enemies to reconsider the value of victory itself. The aftermath of the battle was devastating. Earth's orbital infrastructure was in ruins, millions of humans had died in the fighting, and the planet itself bore the scars of orbital bombardment. But they had survived. More importantly, they had proven that the seemingly unstoppable Devourers could be stopped. "Sir," Rilka said quietly, "how will you explain this to the High Council?" Zexthal was silent for a long moment, watching rescue ships move among the debris fields to search for survivors. Even in the aftermath of their greatest battle, the humans were focused on saving lives rather than celebrating victory. "I think," he said finally, that I understand now why the Council wanted us to observe humans in combat. They needed to know if this species could be trusted with membership in the galactic community. And your conclusion? Zexthal thought about everything he had witnessed over the past months. The tactical creativity against pirates, the principled protection of civilians against raiders, the diplomatic innovation in peacekeeping, and, finally, the absolute defiance in the face of extinction. Humans fight differently than any other species I've studied. He began slowly. They don't fight for conquest or resources or even survival in the traditional sense. They fight for principles, for each other, for the idea that some things are worth preserving even at the cost of everything else. He paused, organizing his thoughts for the report that would help determine humanity's future in the galactic community. They are capable of terrible violence when threatened, but they are also capable of remarkable mercy toward defeated enemies. They can be ruthlessly pragmatic in their tactics while maintaining idealistic goals. Most importantly, they seem to genuinely believe that strength comes from protecting others rather than dominating them. So you'll recommend them for full membership? I'll recommend more than that, Zexthal replied. I'll recommend that the galaxy learn from them, because I've realized something during these observations. We've been asking the wrong question about humanity. What do you mean? We've been wondering if humans can be trusted to join galactic civilization, Zexthal explained. But after watching them fight to protect not just themselves, but the very idea of freedom and dignity for all sentient beings, I think the real question is whether galactic civilization is worthy of them. As the analytical pursuit prepared to depart for the last time, Zexthal began composing his final report. It would recommend not just that humans be granted full membership in the galactic community, but that they be invited to help lead it. Because in a galaxy that had grown accustomed to viewing strength and compassion as incompatible qualities, humanity had proven that the greatest power came from refusing to choose between them. The universe was about to discover what it meant to have protectors who would sacrifice everything to defend the innocent, while never losing sight of what made life worth protecting in the first place. And Zexthal suspected that the galaxy would never be the same.